Good evening, dear devotees. Thank you so much for joining us again for our 6 episodes of the Mini Moons podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest with us all the way from London, UK, Jagannathesvari Devi Dasi, and she's going to be speaking on Lord Chaitanya's secret weapons. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Jagannathesvari, I'll give a brief introduction. She's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and she was originally from the UK. She joined ISKCON in India, where she served for a few years as a young devotee. She also served for several years in South Africa, where she headed up communications and publications for the Durban Temple. For the past 32 years, she's been married and settled back in the UK. She has 2 sons and 1 granddaughter. She's also the founder and director of Krishna Marriage Limited, a legally registered company that provides personalized matchmaking services for devotees worldwide. She is also the author of The 4 Goals of Family Life, which has sold at least 20,000 copies and also has a Russian and Bengali translation. She is currently working on another book about relationships and spirituality, and it's aimed towards a more inclusive target readership. Her primary desire is to serve Prabhupada's mission by raising awareness of the spiritual science of Krishna consciousness among the Western world. So we are very grateful that you're here with us tonight, Mata, and I think you have many years of experience both in being a devotee, guiding other devotees to get married and in their marriages, but also in the field of preaching, and that is going to be the focus of our discussion tonight, especially how ladies, how Vaishnavis can be engaged in Lord Chaitanya's Sun Kirtan mission.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Sharadi, and welcome to our podcast, Mother. We're really grateful for you for giving up your time so generously today. And before we actually get into the nitty gritty, so to speak, given that you've been a bhakti practitioner for so long, can you just explain? Can you just briefly explain how you got into Krishna consciousness, and throughout that long bhakti journey, what kind of outreach and service activities and sankirtan activities you've been involved with over the past 30 odd years, frankly.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here tonight. And actually, it's been actually more than 32 years that I've been in Krishna consciousness. It's been about 40, somewhere between 40 and 50. I kind of lost count. But that's how long I've been back in the UK after my travels in different countries. So basically, I came to Krishna consciousness here. I mean, my journey started in the UK. That was in the time of the 70s. There was a lot of interest in spiritual life among young people, a lot of interest in Indian philosophy and mysticism, and I was also included in that. I was very curious about India and about Eastern philosophy, so I got to the point where I was planning to travel to India to find a guru, and somehow or other, in the meantime, I met some devotees. I got a record of the Hare Krishna mantra. I got a Krishna book. I'll try to cut the long story short, otherwise it'll take too much time. And I visited the temple at Bhaktivedanta Manor. I was really fascinated. And then I traveled overland to India. And on the way, I stopped in Italy and visited the ISKCON temple in Rome. And it was at that point that I met a very nice devotee. She was taking care of me, and I finally became convinced to join ISKCON, because I'd been kind of looking around at different religions, different spiritual movements to make sure I got the right one, you know. So then I ended up joining in India in Vrindavan in 1976, and that's where I got initiated by Srila Prabhupada, my great fortune, and I spent some time there. About 1 year later, I was given the option. I was living in the ashram in Vrindavan, and I was given the option that to either go back to London to preach and to collect funds for the Vrindavan project, or to stay there and learn how to do sewing and embroidery and make deity clothes and crowns and things. So I went for the first one because I really felt that would be more pleasing to Prabhupada. That was Prabhupada's mood, that he left Vrindavan to go to the West and preach. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's when I started going out on the streets of London, doing some book distribution and collecting funds for the temple, for the temple there and the temple in Vrindavan, like that. And then over the years, other activities I got involved with was I moved to South Africa. I was asked to go there and to help out. They were collecting funds to build a temple, which is the big temple in Durban. So I was helping with that as well, mainly doing support and backup services for that collection program with the devotees. And then when the temple opened in 1985, then I became involved in communications and publications, dealing with the media. From then on, it was like full on just outreach, and it was quite exciting time. We initiated the Food for Life program, and we started the Rath Yatra in Durban, and kind of pioneering all these new projects. So that was a very exciting time for me. Then I came back to the UK, and I got married to a book distributor. So I've been supporting him in his preaching, and for myself, that's when I started to take up writing, and I've been writing ever since.
That is a very short whistle stop tour onto your long and illustrious bhakti journey, really. So thank you for taking us through. One quick question I had: you said when you met that Italian devotee, it finally made you sort of convinced to join. Was there sort of a point, what made you finally? Because you did say you were exploring other sort of paths, because people always get very carried away by exploring Eastern philosophies. But it's just what made you pick Krishna consciousness in particular?
I think I was very interested in it, but I hadn't really managed to connect to anyone. And and also I had from my travels, I'd kind of discounted, I'd kind of looked into other things, and they hadn't really attracted me as much. And then somehow it was by Krishna's arrangement that I went there, and I connected with a very nice devotee there who was really kind to me, and who really kind of took me under her wing, and she was questioning me, and what do you really want to do with your life, and we just connected in that way, and I became convinced that from her that this is the way for me. And her name is Rangavati Devi Dasi. She's my god sister, and she stays now in Alatra.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ufasmata. And I think one thing which stood out for me is that you mentioned that until you met her, you hadn't made that personal connection. And I think for many devotees, that is the case. They need to meet someone, whether it's in person or through another medium, that they actually feel they really resonate with. And I think that is one of the reasons why Prabhupada said that all devotees should write. Because, if everybody is writing, they might be, reaching a unique audience, because every person, will connect in a different way to Krishna consciousness. Now, we do know that your first book, The Four Goals of Married Life, was a book which was mainly focused for a devotee audience, and it's been very widely appreciated within the devotee community. But at the moment, you're also working on another book, which is again for focused on relationships, but the intention is that it's for a wider audience. Can you share with us more about what is the content and what is your purpose for this book?
Sure, yes. So the first book was based on Prabhupada's books mainly. I went through the whole Srimad Bhagavatam to find all the material about Grihastha Ashram, and then I organized it in a structured way. So it's kind of like a textbook for Grihastha Ashram for devotees. But then I thought that I'd like to do something for other people, because a lot of people, most people, they don't necessarily accept the authority of Prabhupada's books. They would need to hear from different sources as well. So that's why I decided to write a book using many different sources, so that it would appeal to a wider readership. So it's like a multidisciplinary format that I've used that includes psychology, philosophy, biology, spirituality, and using sources from different cultures and different religions, and from the past, from the present, and kind of fusing them together in a blend. So I've sourced academics and health professionals and spiritual teachers and poets and ancient literatures, ancient philosophy and religion, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's quite a mix-up, really.
So you mentioned earlier that when you went to Vrindavan, you had this option to either stay there and to learn more about deity worship, or to go, back to London and then later South Africa and be more engaged in Sankirtan. And then you said you made that choice. You decided that you feel that is more in line with the line of Prabhupada's mood to go out and to share Krishna consciousness. And it seems that this book, is also again coming from your desire to share Krishna consciousness and to reach people in many different and I think creative ways. So I wanted to, from that, also ask you a question about women's position, in the Sankirtan movement. We know there's a famous conversation between Srila Prabhupada and his disciple Mullah Prakriti Devi Dasi, and she was a book distributor, and Prabhupada mentioned to her that he was of opinion that Lord Chaitanya was sending nice young women to assist him in his Sankirtan mission. And he also mentioned that being a woman can actually be beneficial in Kali Yuga and for preaching. So, how do you think can being a woman actually be beneficial for preaching, and how can we use our feminine qualities in spreading Krishna consciousness?
Okay, regarding that, actually, in answer to your previous question, which is also relevant to this, I just wanted to mention one more thing, that the book that I'm writing about relationships is not just, it's obviously, it has a spiritual purpose, It's not just about relationships. So the reason for writing about relationships is because these relationships are kind of like testing grounds, or like learning classrooms in a sense for helping us to reconnect with Krishna, our original relationship with God. So that was the ultimate purpose. So that is, it's not just about relationships, but it's actually meant to bring people closer to Krishna. And yeah, in answer to this question, so there was something that Prabhupada said in this conversation with Mula Prakriti, when she was a book distributor at the time, and she had a private meeting with Prabhupada in his room. He wanted to talk to her to find out how the book distribution was going. And that's when he said that Lord Chaitanya is sending nice young women to help the poor conditioned souls go back to Godhead. This is his plan. That's what he said. And I also heard from a few people that he said that the women are Lord Chaitanya's secret weapons. Now, we didn't actually, then that's why I gave this title to this talk, but then afterwards we didn't find that in the transcript of that conversation. So whether Prabhupada actually said that or not, I'm not sure. It more or less means the same as what he said, that Lord Chaitanya is sending nice young women to help the poor conditioned souls go back to Godhead. But it's like a kind of embellishment in one sense of what he said, because I think that to become a secret weapon of Lord Chaitanya, it's a very high position. But it's not impossible. But what Prabhupada was talking about, I mean, the context, as I said, was book distribution in public places, door to door. And the point was that people feel less intimidated by women. If women are smiling and being charming, then people don't get intimidated as much as they might do with a man presenting something to them. And so they can more easily take a book. And Prabhupada gave an example that there was a hair oil company in Calcutta who was using that tactic of sending women door to door to sell this hair oil, and all the people were buying it. So that was the point in this context, that it's the kind of softness of women and the charm of women that helps to drop people's guards. And so in that sense, Prabhupada was saying that these young women are sent by Lord Chaitanya. And also there are other feminine qualities that are favorable for spreading Krishna consciousness, such as kindness, soft-heartedness, compassion, and care. These qualities have been endowed on women biologically also to facilitate mothering and raising of children, taking care of the family. And women are caregivers. So this quality is important for both devotee care and outreach, because both of these require kindness and compassion. And another point is that Lord Chaitanya embodied this compassion. Lord Chaitanya was the most merciful incarnation of Godhead. He is known to be the most merciful incarnation of God, and he was Krishna in the mood of Radharani. So all the feminine qualities originate from Radharani. And when Krishna came down as Lord Chaitanya, he manifested that more feminine side. And that came in the mood of preaching and Sankirtan. So that's how the connection is there for women to engage their feminine qualities in preaching and Sankirtan. It's like, for example, just like a mother is always anxious about her children, always worrying about her children when they're not around. Are they okay? Are they safe? And so in the same way, this anxiety about the fallen soul, about suffering souls, it's a kind of a motherly thing to be in anxiety about how all these people in the world are suffering and trying to figure out how to deliver them. Always looking for opportunities to connect with people, to be kind to people, and to find ways to enlighten them. So this is what the Jiva Doya is about. And of course, these qualities are qualities of the soul. So they're not just confined to women. Any advanced devotee is going to have these qualities. Any Madhyama Bhakta actually is going to have these qualities of compassion and mercy. And but to be born as a woman, we kind of tend to have those programmed into us. So that's why it's favorable for us. Like, just like in the Krishna book, there's the example of the Yagic Brahmins, the wives of the Brahmins. When Krishna and Balaram approached the Brahmins for some food, the Brahmins, they were too busy doing their Vedic yagyas. But then when they approached the wives of the Brahmins, they immediately wanted to feed them. And, so it's like that natural, caring, motherly nature of women that can be used for spreading Krishna consciousness. Can't hear you, Dee.
Sorry, I was on mute. That was a beautiful response. Thank you. But with that in mind, can you just elaborate on what you saw Prabhupada's vision was for women in the Sankirtan movement?
Yeah, so Prabhupada's vision was that he wanted the women to be involved as much as possible. So he didn't differentiate between men and women when it came to frontline preaching. He was very happy to have the women going out and preaching, distributing books, doing Sankirtan. So the men and women, it's not that they were sort of mingling. There were men's parties and women's parties going out on the streets, and this was approved by Prabhupada. Of course, they were mixing together on festival programs, stage programs, and Prabhupada also encouraged women to lead kirtans and to give lectures. So Prabhupada never differentiated. He always encouraged both his male and female disciples to spread Krishna consciousness in any way they could, and this was his primary mission.
So this then contradicts the somewhat kind of idea we hear always being floated around, because Prabhupada also emphasized the importance of women being wives and mothers, right? But then some people can misinterpret almost that, he really wanted women to focus on being wives and mothers, and this idea that if somebody wants to focus on being a good wife and a good mother, then they shouldn't really be too involved in, preaching activities or going out and being too involved, so to speak, that it would interfere with the motherhood. And that was something that was very important to Prabhupada. How could you elaborate that in the context that you just described as what Prabhupada saw the vision for, what his vision was essentially for women in the Sankirtan movement?
Well, it is normal and natural for women to get married and have children. And, Prabhupada obviously acknowledged that. He didn't want us to all become nuns. He was very practical. The Varnashram system is meant to place everyone in their natural position so that they can be happy and peaceful and make spiritual progress. So I don't see that there's any competition between the two, between Sankirtan and family life, because one is the ashram, family life, that's the ashram, grihastha ashram, and the other is the varna or the service, devotional service. So, well, married women with small children should give priority to their families. Prabhupada did not advocate neglect of children. He was very conscientious with his female disciples that had young children, that they would give priority to taking care of their children, keeping them safe, and doing whatever needed to be done to look after them. That when they're young, that's actually a priority. Women who are single or don't have any children, or whose children are grown bigger, then they can devote more time to outreach. So it just depends on the situation there. But because women with small children need to take care of them and teach them. But those women, they can also find opportunities to touch the lives of others if they keep that mood of Sankirtan. They are teaching their children, they are supporting their husbands if their husbands are doing preaching activities, and they can support in many ways. So, I don't think there's any contradiction between those two, and they both have their place. So while the Sankirtan mission is the main purpose of Islam, but either you're on the front line, or you're supporting, or you're bringing up the next generation of preachers. It's all part of the Sankirtan mission. But there shouldn't be any kind of idea that women are not supposed to go out and preach, and that it's not Vedic or something, because that definitely wasn't Prabhupada's move.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think two things that stood out for me is one is that Prabhupada didn't discriminate on who's qualified or unqualified for preaching based on gender, but I think it was based on the individual devotee's capacity. And then I think the other thing which we sometimes misunderstood, that we don't have to think that women have to either be good mothers and wives or be engaged in preaching and outreach. But as you mentioned, that depending on the phase of life that you're in and your individual circumstances, women could, if they keep that desire to do outreach within their hearts, they could balance both. And different phases give more attention to one or the other. So I think it's good to know that Prabhupada, I don't think, was in many ways, he wasn't I think very black and white, but I think he was more inclined to to encourage us to adapt to the situation, with the ultimate goal always of sharing Krishna consciousness. And this leads us to another question, and it's related to Prabhupada's, I would say, almost like his ultimate vision for his disciples. So on more than one occasion, Srila Prabhupada told his disciples that he wanted all of them to become qualified to act as gurus, sharing Krishna consciousness. And when he was asked whether he was only referring to the men or the women, he said that he also was referring to the young women. So how can we understand and fulfill this instruction that all devotees should become gurus in spreading Krishna consciousness today?
Yeah, I think this instruction, it's very important and should be kept to the forefront, because it applies to all the followers of Prabhupada. Although he gave this instruction to his disciples, but it's obviously also applicable to his grand-disciples, great-grand-disciples, etc., etc. I mean, Prabhupada has given us complete spiritual knowledge, and he's given us the process of how to get out of this material world and go back home. So we owe him a huge debt of gratitude. And also, it's now our responsibility to pass on what he has given to us. So it doesn't mean that we have to become Diksha Gurus, that we all have to give initiation, but as Shiksha Gurus, it's actually the responsibility of all devotees, especially those who are initiated, to pass on whatever they have learnt to others. And I think we need to be always aware of this responsibility and our debt of gratitude, and constantly be trying to find ways and means to fulfill it. And this is really the mood of a Vaishnava. So we shouldn't think, that, oh, well, I'm not a guru, I'm just a servant, and so I can't do any of that. But actually, anyone who has been given Krishna consciousness, the full package, and taken that up, also takes up that responsibility to become a guru, in the sense of passing on to others whatever they've learned, sharing it. And because the more you share it as well, the more empowered you become and the more realized you become. And without sharing it, it just it loses life, and you get stuck.
Thank you so much, Mata. I really appreciated the point that you made, that this instruction of all, not only Prabhupada's disciples, but his followers needing to become guru, it's not so much about the official status or position as it is about the responsibility to realize, what Prabhupada has given us, and then to go out and share it, with the world. Because it's a very different meditation if we think, I am entitled to this social position, versus thinking that I have this responsibility to actually become the person and the devotee that feels compassion for others to such an extent that I am willing to give my time and my effort to try and share Krishna consciousness with them. So I really appreciated your view on that pastime.
No, and I think I also really appreciated the point you made about having a depth of gratitude, because I think this issue about gurus, gets everybody a bit wound up, sometimes about getting into the semantics of it. But like Shraddha just said, it's just not about the title, that having that depth of gratitude and taking that almost duty to share. Duty around the importance of sharing Krishna consciousness. And this brings me to another question. Back in the day, or so to speak, the traditional forms of sharing Krishna consciousness was, serving in the forms of either the Sunday love feast, the harinams, the book distribution. But conscious that the society has somewhat evolved, and and with that we need to find different ways perhaps of sharing this Krishna consciousness with a modern 21st century audience, so to speak. So with this in mind, how can we adapt outreach activities so that it's more fitting, or it kind of resonates more with the 21st century audience?
That's a very good question. Yes, Prabhupada wanted us to actually tax our brains and be innovative. And even at that time when he was present, and what to speak of now when so much time has elapsed, and as you said, there have been so many changes in society. The world is not now what it was then. At that time, there was a lot of interest in Indian spirituality, in gurus, and things have shifted a little bit more since then, although that interest is still there among some people, but there's also more cynicism, and so that's why it's really important to find different ways to spread Krishna consciousness, because if we just keep doing the same things and we're not getting much results, that also confirms that we need to look at other ways, and we really need to use our God-given intelligence to find ways to attract all kinds of people to Krishna consciousness, because everyone needs that. So there are many ways. I mean, I can just mention a few examples, but they're really unlimited. Like nowadays, like for example, on social media, there's a lot can be done. Online forums, like YouTube videos, TED Talks, writing books, which is what I'm doing, and public programs. You can hold a program in your home, or you can rent a hall, hold a program. Devotees can get together and arrange things like this with publicity and media. And then, like another alternative to the conventional Harinam is outside gatherings, more sort of chilled, like in parks, sitting down with a more gentle kirtan and with discussions, questions and answers, and just one-to-one, also talking to people and getting connected. So there's so many different ways that devotees can tax their brains and think of and go out and do. The list just goes on and on, really.
So, Mata, thank you for sharing some ideas of how devotees can be innovative, and continue to share Krishna consciousness in ways, which are relevant and relatable to more, I would say, modern people. But now a question that comes to mind is that you mentioned that Prabhupada said that we should be taxing our brains to think of new ideas to share Krishna consciousness. At the same time, Prabhupada also on multiple occasions stressed that we should be very careful not to change the teachings or the methods of practicing bhakti yoga. So, how do we remain chaste to the tradition while also being progressive so that we make Krishna consciousness more accessible to diverse people?
Okay, so the main thing is that we have to differentiate between principles and details. It's really, really important to understand the difference. And this was explained by Rupa Goswami, the difference between the principles and the details. So principles, they're the ones that can't be changed, and the details are the ones that can be changed. So we need to learn to recognize which is which. So like the main principles that we don't change is the philosophy, obviously, the 4 regulative principles, the chanting, and the institution of ISKCON. And I mean, apart from those, basically everything else can be adjusted, because everything else is detail. It's like external, like cultural trappings. So all these externals can be adjusted, and while at the same time we remain faithful to the essence of Krishna consciousness and the Vedic teachings.
So, a follow-up question. You mentioned now that we can get caught up on things which are not essential. They might be details and which might become cultural trappings. So, for instance, we sometimes have had a debate in ISKCON about, what we would call Vaishnava clothing. Now, what is and what isn't Vaishnava clothing? And, is it important to wear Vaishnava attire or is it not important? So, with specific reference to this issue, because it's kind of been an ongoing debate. I mean, would you say that emphasizing the need to wear Vaishnava clothing, for instance, when going to the temple, do you think that's a cultural detail that might be creating a barrier for some devotees? And if so, how do we address it? um, because there are some devotees that feel that that is an essential part of the culture. You've got to dress like a devotee to be a devotee and to feel like a devotee, and looking like a devotee is very important.
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as Vaishnava clothing, as far as I can understand. A Vaishnava means a devotee of Vishnu, and devotion to Vishnu, that's something spiritual, whereas clothing is something material. So that's why it's a detail, it's an external. Prabhupada even said himself that this dress is not important. And so if we get hung up about dress, that means we're getting hung up about details that are not important. And it can get very petty. So there are no rules and regulations. Actually, this dress, this saris and dhotis, was not even introduced by Prabhupada, in the sense that Prabhupada never requested, what to speak of demanded, that his disciples should wear this dress. It was the disciples themselves who wanted to wear this dress. And so Prabhupada allowed it, but he was not really fussed about it at all, actually. And so when it comes to dress, I think everyone could choose what they want to wear. Of course, the dress should be decent and respectable dress. But I think especially when it comes to outreach, this dress code can be quite a barrier, and I think it is actually creating a barrier.
Thank you so much. So, connected to that issue of dress potentially becoming a barrier, we have also seen, I would say probably since the 1980s, in several countries in the world, that ISKCON congregations have increasingly become predominated by people from Indian culture or community. And I think, with that, we've seen what some devotees have referred to as an Indianization, of ISKCON, things as the dress, things as, cuisine, which is coming from, a certain part in India, because that's also different, depending on where in the world we are. But that has become a major feature of many ISKCON temple experiences. And we have seen that although for some individuals, who might have an affinity for India and interest in India, this might be attractive, but for many others, it might not. I remember, being at Bhaktivedanta Manor and speaking to two people who were from a British background, and I spoke to them on different occasions, and both of them said exactly the same thing to me, which I think was quite significant. And both of them said to me that although they appreciated the Krishna conscious philosophy and they appreciated reading the books, they both told me that they could not become members of ISKCON because they were not Hindus, and they also weren't interested, in converting and becoming Hindus. And we, however, know that although Prabhupada, of course, welcomed everyone and would have been, I'm sure, very grateful seeing that ISKCON has become a type of a, cultural shelter for many Indian people that have migrated outside of India. We also know that he specifically wanted us to share Krishna consciousness with the local people of, each country, whether that was in Africa or whether that, was in Europe. He wanted the local people to, I think, be a big part at least of the congregation. So what do you think are other barriers for, the local people of countries to come to Krishna consciousness, maybe especially for women, and not only to come to the temple, because I think people might come to the temple, but what are the barriers for them to really start practicing Krishna consciousness and integrate into the community?
Yeah, well, if we, like you were speaking about the Indianization of ISKCON, and that is really an issue um, because much as we love all these nice Indian people who are coming to the temple, who are becoming devotees, it's wonderful. At the same time, it can become problematic for attracting Western people because when they see the temples full of Indian people, and they think it's a Hindu temple, and then they think it's not for them. And the dress can also be a barrier like that. So that is a big challenge now currently for ISKCON, of how to reach Western people, and we have to actually change the image of ISKCON, which has become known as a Hindu religion. I just saw the other day there was something on the BBC website about the temple in Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland that they call it, and the write-up, it just said that the Hare Krishna movement is a Hindu religion, is a branch of Hinduism, and it's an Indian religion, and basically that's what it's known as now. But actually, that's not what it is, and so we have to find a way to change this image, to re-educate people, and also set up alternative programs for Western people in cases sometimes where there is a large temple with a large Indian congregation. Then we need to create sometimes separate programs and separate facilities for Western people that we can reach out to them and bring them in and present it in a different way as to what it really is, which is a spiritual science.
That's really important. You mentioned that a lot of points that you mentioned really resonated with me. The first being there's no such thing as Vaishnava dress, because something that because I might look a certain way, but I'm not from an Indian background. And this whole thing about, Hinduism, although I've been familiar with it, I've personally been raised a Buddhist, but, although I knew I was somewhat familiar with the concepts, it made me first, bunch of people in dhotis, that public image we present is very important. And one thing that is also that led me think is just the problem point you mentioned about that BBC article, and what image we want to present is, in countries like India, the public acts of worship, perhaps harinam and, guru worship, sadhus, people dressed in saffron, is a very common day-to-day occurrence. But this to a Western society could come across as very alien, and it can be very off-putting. Because I remember personally, before I came into Krishna consciousness, I saw people going on Harinam at Oxford Street. I've bumped into devotees in Sweden, in the Netherlands when I was just on holiday, and I honestly thought they were a bunch of weird people just on. I genuinely thought they were a bunch of buskers, because it's just, if that's something that you're not familiar with, that's what people think. So how do we actually transform this image that actually we're not a bunch of buskers if you didn't know what you were looking at, or or a bunch of frankly less intelligent people. Because if people don't understand the concept of being ecstatic in the presence of God and in the presence of the mantra, it could come across as something quite strange. So how do we, in light of what you mentioned, how do we actually go about changing that image, so that public image, so that people take devotees seriously and actually look at our philosophy and think, actually this is there's a lot more to it than the face value, and there's a very serious underlying philosophy that's embedded within it all.
Right, yes. Yes, I think what we need to do is to try to fit in more than, instead of trying to not fit in the sense of try to make people feel comfortable, because we are creating barriers when we represent ourselves in public in a certain way, in the way that we behave, the way that we dress, the way that we kind of separate ourselves, and it's like people are getting the message that they may feel that we are somehow presenting ourselves as being superior to them, as different from them, and they just find it hard to relate. And so I think we really need to be smarter about this. Like for example, the Christians, they fitted in. They didn't. You don't see them going around wearing desert robes and sandals and beards. I don't think that would have worked. But they accepted the Western dress and they fitted in, and you can see how successful it was, Christianity. So if we don't learn to adapt to the society, then we will become extinct, just like extinct animals that they don't adapt, they become extinct. So if we want to be accepted by serious people, by educated people, we need to also educate ourselves, and also don't just quote Vedic scriptures, but find common ground with people from different backgrounds, because there is so much common ground. There is so much that we have in common with other people, with other cultures, with other religions. So why not work on what we have in common instead of looking at what is different, instead of trying to make ourselves different? Because then we create such a big gap that people, they cannot negotiate, they cannot jump across that huge gap that we're creating. We need to bring people closer and, make a level playing field, come down to their level. Don't put ourselves on the plinth, of being high and mighty and better than them. But because people will pick up on this, and they'll just feel like that, if they feel that we have that attitude, even if devotees don't necessarily have that attitude, but it may come across in that way, and it's just going to distance people, and we need to look in common ground, see what we have in common, and make people feel that I'm not, I'm like you, we're all human beings. We were all like them before we became devotees. We're not perfect, we're full of flaws. We're just very fortunate that we've been blessed by coming into contact with ISKCON and actually being able to get involved in that and being able to dedicate ourselves to that. So, but there's so much we have in common with people, because they're all spirit souls like us. They're all actually devotees of Krishna like us. It's just that they haven't realized it yet. So, we need to come closer and connect with people and not be afraid If we are secure in ourselves and our Krishna consciousness, there's nothing to be afraid of, that we can actually deal with people, connect with people, and try to touch other people's hearts and minds.
No, thank you. That was a very beautiful response because there was so much, so many golden nuggets of wisdom packed into it. And I think the most important thing I took from that was that actually us connecting with people and not putting ourselves on almost a high pedestal, or at least unintentionally coming across by trying to be very fixated upon this. We are Vaishnavas, we have a Vaishnava etiquette, we have a Vaishnava code of conduct, we have a Vaishnava dress code, and all these, and like you said, it's what it's all doing is taking that details into too much essentially, and forgetting that actually it's not about the details, it's about the principles, and it's about finding commonality with others, and kind of relating to them, because as the saying goes, when in Rome, act like the Romans. You can't just go into
Mhm.
other countries and try and expect them to all dress up, and like you said, then we're just kind of really risking shooting ourselves in the foot. Really,
Mhm.
aren't we?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Sharadia, did you have any points? Sorry, go for it.
Yes, I also wanted to mention that Mata, you said that if we are not sensitive, we can do things which actually make people feel uncomfortable, and we can act in ways which people consider very strange or very unconventional, and then that can create barriers for people to want to practice Krishna consciousness. But then what we're also doing is we're creating this big divide where it's very clear that we are a group, and the rest of the world is another group. We create this separation, and I find that very interesting because one of the key characteristics of cults or extremist religious groups is this understanding of there's a us and there's a them. And I think we can very easily, fall into the trap. There's us as devotees, and then there's the outside world, and we've got different names that we call them, etc. And I mean, it's clear that Prabhupada didn't intend ISKCON to be a cult, but we can fall into cultish behavior, I think, very
Mhm.
easily, if we're not conscious. And then another point, that you made is that we need to be conscious of what's happening in the world, and be connected and make necessary adjustments. And I was thinking of religious communities that don't do so. For instance, the Amish, a very conservative Christian religious group, based in the States. They lived in closed off communities. I mean, you can enter it if you're just a normal person from the United States, but you cannot live there unless you are Amish. But what is interesting about the Amish, although they have this very, conservative, culture, they don't use electricity, they also don't use money, and they basically self-sufficient, and they dressed in, clothes from another century. But the Amish are not a missionary movement. The Amish increase their population by having children, and the Amish, don't actually say that they intend to reach out. So I think it's very interesting for us to, think about them, but then to recognize that in essence, Lord Chaitanya's movement is a missionary movement. We are not, we don't have, our main focus is not only, to maintain our community, and to make sure that we maintain our community by having children. The whole emphasis is on bringing more and more people in to the movement.
Yes.
And
Sorry, I'm just
related,
moving around because I have to plug in my computer, but please carry on.
no worries. And
Don't mind me.
related to that point, Mother, was a point that I was thinking, there is certainly a rise in spirituality, but with the rise in spirituality, there is also a rise in atheism, and kind of this kind of almost dislike towards institutionalized religions or religious institutions, to be honest, and the rise of impersonalism alongside spirituality. So although people class ourselves as a spiritual movement and quite philosophical, at the heart of our teachings is that personalism. So, how do we actually approach these spiritually inclined impersonalists? Because I personally struggle, having those conversations with people who class themselves as spiritual, but at the heart of their kind of spirituality is this idea of impersonalism and atheism. So, how do we connect with those kind of people, really?
That's a good question. So we need to learn how to defeat atheism and impersonalism with logic and philosophy. There are many good arguments in favor of theism, personalism, and really there are no good arguments in favor of atheism and impersonalism. That there are no strong arguments. So we just need to educate ourselves and learn how to convince others in speaking and in writing. So, that's like a whole nother topic, which probably would take a long time to go through all the, not all, but even some of the possible arguments that we could use. I'll just give a few quick examples, like for example, for people who don't believe that that are just like materialist, and they don't believe in anything metaphysical. They can easily be defeated because just by pointing out that, for example, equality is a very important thing nowadays for people, isn't it? It's like the basis of modern democracy, equality. But there is no such thing as equality on the material platform, because everyone is different. Everyone is different in terms of their intellect, in terms of their physical strength and skills and talents, etc., etc. Everyone is different. So there is no equality on the material platform. So where does this equality come from? It means that it's a metaphysical concept. And so everyone who believes in equality is, in a sense, embracing a metaphysical concept, which means they believe that that we live in a bi-dimensional universe, that there is a metaphysical other side to the universe, to the cosmos. So, and there are many other things that can be proved to be metaphysical as well, like virtues and like love and like aesthetics, so many things. So that's one line of argument. And there are also many others, like in the history of religion, the common ground between religions and spiritual experience. This is all a kind of self-evident truth. There's the concept of self-evident truth. Yeah, there are many arguments, so we just need to study. They're not really so hard to understand, actually, and to learn. And if we study some of these and become familiar with them, then we can use them to easily defeat impersonalists and atheists if they are honest and sincere enough to accept defeat. But if they are not honest and sincere, they won't accept defeat anyway. But if they are, then we can defeat them, and we just have to learn how. And Prabhupada, he was always actually encouraging his disciples to learn how to defeat people. He would challenge them, like going out on morning walks. He would challenge his disciples. He would play the devil's advocate and come up with some impersonalist argument, and then challenge his disciples to defeat him. So this is something we really need to be on our toes about.
Thank you so much, Mata, for sharing your thoughts on how we can speak to personalists and atheists. And I think what becomes clear is that if we look for certain common held beliefs or values in the modern world, we see that many of them only work if you actually have a belief in at least a higher power, at least some form of God. So, you gave the example of, equality. We can only have equality really if we do believe in a spiritual reality. I think another example is that most people would agree that the most satisfying experiences that they've had is those that they've shared with other people and where there was an exchange of love. And to have, an exchange of love, you actually, on an ultimate level, you are going to need another being. And that is essential. There's no question of love with a void or love with an energy. So I think that, if we take some time to reflect about it deeply, we actually see that a lot of people are, believing in principles and ideas which are in contrast to atheism. And I think if we can, in a kind way, point it out to them, I think you were right that we can then make them develop faith in understanding which includes a personal God. Now, another issue that people have, though, I think, especially in more modern societies, is that there are people that are spiritual. They might even say that they do believe in a higher power. They're open to the idea of God, but they have a great mistrust in organized religion or religious institutions. So, how can we prevent people's experiences within ISKCON from becoming institutionalized? Because we know as ISKCON expands, there's a need for things becoming more organized, becoming more structured. But the moment that happens, there's always the risk of we, really taking a spiritual movement and making it an institutionalized religion.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Well, first of all, as Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is not a religion. It is a spiritual science, because in the sense of religion, in the sense that the way people interpret the word today, they see this religion, that religion, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever. So in that sense, Krishna consciousness is not a religion, but rather it is a spiritual science that is meant for everyone, of whatever religion they belong to or don't belong to. So, and that's how Prabhupada wanted us to present it. I think a lot of people have become put off from organized religion because of there's a very bad history with sectarianism, fanaticism, and conflict and war. So this has given people a very bad impression of religion. Terrorism and suicide bombs and all these horrible things based on so-called religion. So, of course, Bhakti has nothing to do with all this. And Krishna consciousness is also beyond institutions. So an institution is meant to facilitate spiritual life. But spiritual life is not bound by an institution, because Krishna consciousness can be practiced either within or without of an institution. Of course, we have the institution of ISKCON that Prabhupada set up, and that we should remain faithful to. But ISKCON is not just an institution in the sense of management and bureaucracy, but first and foremost, it's a mission. ISKCON is first and foremost a mission. So as long as we're loyal to the mission, to Prabhupada's mission, the Sankirtan movement, then we are in that sense loyal to ISKCON, to the institution. But we don't have to be, like you were saying, some people could get put off if there's because institutions sometimes they can become bureaucratic, they can become a little bit dry, and different kinds of imperfections can filter in, kind of rules and regulations with maybe some prejudices and things like that, which could put people off. So we have to just allow people to engage with it in their own way. For those who are satisfied to work within a particular temple or an institution, that's fine. If they have some problems with an institution, with a temple, or with certain people there, then let them engage with Krishna consciousness in their own way, and just associate with those devotees who inspire them. So we don't have to be controlled by any particular part of the institution.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. But now, related to that, moving to some of our audience questions, Anjali was making the comment that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had this concept of Sanatan Dharma, which would unite all different religions. And you also said that we should make an effort to look for similarities with people from other religions, and also people within the academic world, etc. But within the Vaishnava community, we see that often there is tension between, say, ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math, or ISKCON and devotees who follow Narayan Raj. And we often have situations, I've had the situation myself, where if I, for instance, post something, a lecture which was given by a devotee which is not an ISKCON, then people will question me and say, why am I doing this? I'm not being faithful or chaste to Prabhupada. So how can we address that issue of understanding how we can relate to, connect with, and respect just other Vaishnava sanghas?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think that we should always respect other Vaishnavas. At the same time, I think it's a matter of personal choice if we want to get involved with other Vaishnav Sanghas. We're not really obliged to do that. There is, while we are all, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, following the same path, worshipping Lord Chaitanya, but there are also different emphases. Like in ISKCON, there's more of an emphasis on outreach, as we've been talking about, whereas some other sanghas may have less emphasis on outreach and maybe more on bhajan, like that. So, in that sense, there may be differences, but still, we should just respect all the Vaishnavas. And but we can choose our association, whoever inspires us the most in our path. Is that okay?
Thank you. Another question we had from Anjali was that everybody need Krishna consciousness, but not everyone is looking for the same level. So how to bring the goat yoga, wine yogas, as you know, in the UK and some parts of Europe, this idea of yoga is really, taking off, and there's different forms of it. So with this, like you mentioned, the rise of spirituality. So how do we get this some sort of spiritually inclined goat yogis into bhakti, because everybody needs Krishna consciousness in their life. So how can we actually bring those kind of people into bhakti, or share them the path of bhakti?
Right. Goat yoga. Okay.
I've seen this, mother. I have. There's alpaca yoga, there's goat yoga, there's doga, and I've seen beer yoga. I mean, God forbid, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, all sorts.
these kinds of yogas, they're not necessarily really spiritual or connected with bhakti. I think yoga's become very popular these days, but the real meaning of the word yoga is probably not very well understood, and mainly the benefits they are getting. Of course, it's good that they are learning to become more peaceful and more sattvic. So in that sense, it's good. Other than that, it's mainly for health purposes, for health and well-being, I suppose you could say. So, but processes for bringing them in, for connecting them with bhakti, I don't think there would be any difference with anyone else, because I mean, I think it needs to be understood that what yoga is. Really, I think the meaning of yoga needs to be more understood. And, there's nothing in the 7 purposes of ISKCON about yoga, about teaching yoga or, astrology, Ayurveda, what else? All these different items. None of them are in the 7 purposes of ISKCON. So, but if people who are doing some form of yoga are interested in spiritual life, then it could be a way to get them interested. And perhaps by just starting off with this principle of yoga, explaining the different kinds of yoga and what is the meaning of Bhakti yoga, that it is actually not just an exercise, but a way of life for connecting with God.
And I think that's very important because I've just recently started yoga, and you see everybody's on their different journey. And I know certain instructors that I've met, they've just become interested in the physical aspect of yoga, but then since then they've actually been more curious and have actually studied the Bhagavad Gita. And I've had yoga instructors quote the Bhagavad Gita, during class, so which is wonderful to see people actually, looking at what yoga means. But I think it's just that, like you said, I suppose in answer to that question, we need to try and connect with people according to their capacity and according to their willingness and where they're at in their own journey, isn't it? And there's, I
Mm,
suppose, no one size fits all.
right, yes, exactly. It's a very individual thing, as you say.
Thank you so much, Mata, for sharing your thoughts on yoga. I do teach yoga myself, so I always like to think that it's potentially a way we can connect people to Krishna consciousness. But as you emphasized, we then need to um, be able to teach people what is real yoga and what's actually the goal of yoga, so that we can then gradually and even in small ways help people to progress to a more spiritual understanding and a more spiritual appreciation for yoga. Now, we had a question from someone in the audience about where they could purchase your book. So I just wanted to confirm, told them that they could buy your book, The Four Calls of Family Life, from Amazon. Is there another place where someone could also find your book?
It is on Amazon Kindle, and also on Amazon. I mean, mainly on Kindle. I'm not sure. It could be on Krishna.com. Not sure if they still have some copies left. If you're in England, then I have some copies in my house. If you're in the UK, but yeah, otherwise, it's also available in various shops in Loy Bazaar, I think, because they've taken over the printing over there.
All right, thank you so much for sharing. So, John Farrow who asked, I hope that you heard. It is available on Amazon. You can also check on Krishna.com. And then, if you're in India, you could also have a look at Loy Bazaar. And if you happen to be in the UK, it seems like Mother Jagannathesvari has given you a very kind invitation to visit her and to pick up your personally, I think maybe signed copy of the book.
I mean, I'm tempted to take up on that offer, Martha.
Please do.
I can't see any other questions, Sharadia. So I don't know, Mother, whether you had some final comments or thoughts you wanted to share before we wrap up the session today.
I think I missed out something in one question about barriers for women. I think something that maybe we were going to touch on, but maybe I missed that.
Yes, Mata. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I didn't include that in my question, but we did discuss wanting to bring this up. Uh, there is a wonderful devotee. Maybe I should not mention his name, but there's a wonderful devotee who I got to know in the UK who does a great amount of food distribution. And I remember working with this devotee, and this devotee also goes on Harinam very often. And I remember speaking to him. I mean, this is a gentleman, and he's quite a few years older than I am, so around my father's age. And he said to me that if he was a young, intelligent, educated woman, he would not join ISKCON. He made that statement, which I found very interesting. And I asked him, why is this? And he just said, because of the way women are seen and treated, etc. So, what do you think are barriers that there are specifically for women? Say the example that he used, women from Western culture who have, grown up in a more liberal environment, who would be, educated, have their own careers, etc. What are some barriers for them becoming members and active participants in ISKCON?
Yes, I think it's really important that we come up to date with that issue, because I mean, I have heard stories of women coming to the temple, being interested, and then getting put off and going away again when they've seen the way that women have been treated. So I think it's really important to change that culture. And I mean, that's not even the way that Prabhupada taught. It's just kind of crept in. It kind of crept in, this kind of segregation. I mean, of course, there has to be some kind of segregation, but kind of relegating women to the back and keeping them out of sight, and women not really feeling that they have equal access with men to various services, and especially leadership positions and things like that. So I think it's really important that we update all our temples, and that women can have equal treatment, equal access to service, and be respected. I mean, the real Vedic culture is that women should be respected, and so we need to bring that back and promote equality for women, so that modern women, they can actually get involved in Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, we're doing them a great injustice.
And I think personally, from what I've seen, is the point that we touched upon, that barrier is that cultural, almost for cultural reasons, and that how, talked about the Indianization of ISKCON. And I think that because in certain cultures, women are considered to be, sat at the back, certain cultural norms, which is okay in a certain part of the world. But I think it's again being that, you're then trying to impose it on perhaps a Western society where women think differently, and that could be hugely off-putting. And I've personally had conversations with certain devotees, and I'm sure, and I've been put down and said, oh, disregarded, whatever. But I'm sure if I was a bloke, I'm sure, they would say, oh, Prabhu, thank you. That's a very valid conversation. But sometimes, just because you're a woman and you've given a feedback which is legitimate or valid, oh, there's this worked up Mataji, that kind of thing. So I think that kind of respect is something we need to perhaps, I think, like you said, like with leadership at the top, and then it trickles down through congregations. Because when you see this kind of behavior from the top, in some instances, or very senior devotees for whatever reasons, cultural practices or norms, then it's only ever going to trickle down, isn't it? And it just doesn't really set a good precedence.
Yes, yes, indeed. Absolutely.
I think one interesting thing that you mentioned, you were saying that, women should be treated with respect because, that was essential part of Vedic culture. And then you also said that, there should be a sense of equality when it comes to service. And I think sometimes when, we say equality, we think that that means, exactly the same treatment, for everyone. But I don't think that's necessarily equality. Like if I think about in education, if you wanted to give children equal access or equal opportunity to prove that, they have accomplished a certain task or they have mastered, certain content, you wouldn't actually give, each child the exact same assignment, but you would give a child an assignment which is relevant to their strengths and their way of, of learning and thinking. So I think in the same way, when it comes to treating devotees equally, it doesn't necessarily mean that we treat them exactly the same, but it means that we are equally concerned for their engagement and for their growth, and equally concerned of how we can get that individual, to flourish. So equal value, equal concern,
Mm-hmm.
equal opportunities. So I think that is definitely something that Prabhupada did do and mastered, to really give, an equal, like I think he wanted to make Krishna consciousness equally accessible to
Mm-hmm.
people, regardless of the gender, regardless, of the background, regardless of their culture.
Mm-hmm. And this equality rate, it connects also with the spiritual vision. It fits in with the spiritual vision. Pandita Samadarshana, from the Gita, that we see the soul. Everyone is a soul. So in that sense, on a spiritual platform, everyone is equal in the eyes of God. But that is, I
Thank
mean, that's the essence of the philosophy. So that should be there. If that spiritual vision is not there, then we're going to have all this kind of discrimination, prejudice, and all this nonsense.
Thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to, conscious of the time? I can't see any questions. Sharadia, did you want to add a few final comments, or we can, if not, wrap it up?
I just wanted to thank Jagannathesvari Mata for being with us. I always find having her present, having conversations with her, hearing from her, I find it very nourishing. And I do really enjoy how I find that You are very warm and very motherly, but at the same time, you're also a very deep thinker. And I also appreciate, that you continue to want to share Krishna consciousness, and that you come up, with such, I think, unique ways to do so. Like I really appreciate the idea for the book that you are, working on. And yeah, I've appreciated just so many insights you've shared with us. And the last thing that you were mentioning, how we have to have this equal vision, I think that ties in well, with where we started the conversation of, women who can actually become, Lord Chaitanya's almost like secret agents. And on the one hand, we need to have this equal vision, seeing that ultimately everyone is a devotee, and we need to just find a way to connect them with Krishna consciousness. And while we, are having these female bodies, we can use our natural feminine qualities to connect with people, to nurture people, to care for people, and in that way, facilitate them becoming devotees, and also, staying devotees throughout their whole lives. So, yeah, that was what I wanted to share. We have some appreciation for you in the comments. I see Guru Charana Padma has said, "Thank you so much, Mother." Um, and a few others have also commented that they've really appreciated the talk. And I do hope that they and we will also have opportunity to hear from you again in the future. Jagannathesvari Mataji does give class sometimes at Bhaktivedanta Manor, if I'm correct.
Sometimes I haven't been doing it so much lately. So, yeah. But thank you very much for having me on the past podcast, and I really enjoyed it and being with you and discussing these things. And yeah, it was wonderful discussion. I think really important topic.
No, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. For all of you that joined us on Facebook and on YouTube on various podcasts, please do follow us on YouTube or Facebook. You know the channels, just to be updated on our next sessions. We've got some exciting sessions lined up, which we will be posting details on very soon. But a very special thank you to Jagannatheshwari Mataji for joining us today. And thank you, everybody at home, for all your constant support and for your comments, and for, of course, tuning in on Mondays to listen to what we have to say. And just wanted to wish everybody a delightful rest of the Sunday evening and a blissful week ahead. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hare Krishna.